Just a little bit more about IFEX. IPI is a founding member of IFEX, and I personally have been around IFEX for almost 15 years, and I cannot stress enough the importance of having Wesley on board, of having ACM, both in terms of Wesley's own expertise and the opinions, that the knowledge that he brings to the network, but also in terms of learning from this region. The fact that he brings to the attention of the world developments from this region, and while press freedom problems may exist here, there is also a lot to learn from journalists from other countries, from what happens here. So it has been great, and I as Wesley mentioned, there is an activist who is in prison there, and IFEX, the Secretariat decided to do something to raise awareness about her case. So they produced T-shirts which said "Free this journalist," whose name I've forgotten, and both in English and in local language, and gave it to the participants. And there were probably over 300 of us there, and yet, and we all got this pink T-shirt, and that we like it or not, that we think it's elegant or not, that we think it fits with our cloth or whatever. Believe me, everybody wore it that evening, and so we made a big kind of a big parade of all the IFEX members and anybody else who was there, sitting on what they call there the tuk-tuks, so that kind of little motorcycles, all wearing the same T-shirt. It was a strong outcome. It was a strong effect. It was a strong advocacy and a strong sense that we all are here for a reason, and that is to protect the principle. And what Wesley said is to protect the principle, not the category. And that's press freedom and freedom of expression. Coming back to this region, in September 2010, an independent Caribbean journalist reported on a new outbreak of cholera in an area of the island where he was living and where the government had officially claimed that the illness had been eradicated. The journalist also reported that 5 tons of humanitarian aid, food, sent to the country by the World Health Organization had been left to spoil in the country's airport. He was jailed, accused of insulting the country's president and his brother under the country's defamation laws. He was held in prison for over 6 months. And after an intense campaign by IPI and Amnesty International and other local groups, he was eventually released. The journalist's name is Calixto Martinez, and the country is Cuba. And while Cuba is certainly the most restrictive country in the region, every other country in the Caribbean has exactly the same laws on their books. So the same thing could theoretically happen to any other journalists in the region. And these are laws which criminalize defamation and allow state authorities to put journalists in jail for allegedly ruining somebody's reputation, it doesn't matter if the news they publish is true or is in the public interest. Calixto Martinez was lucky. He's the one of the very few journalists who was able to get out of a Cuban prison and yet not had to leave the country. But and this was an important victory for press freedom in Cuba and for the region, and for organizations like IPI and those who with us campaigned for him. But at the same time, this was an immense loss for journalism in Cuba. I'm quite sure that neither Calixto Martinez nor any other journalist in Cuba will ever dare to report on the same type of issues, because they do not want to have the same, to end up having the same, end up in prison as he did. And this is, so while these type of laws in most of the other Caribbean countries are not used They're just on the books, but many people don't even know that they have the criminal defamation laws. But many other countries do use criminal defamation laws and do use them to stifle press freedom and to silence journalists. In Antigua and Barbuda, in 2005, a Dominican journalist called Lennox Linton was charged with criminal defamation. Eventually, he was deported, had to leave the country. In the Dominican Republic, Johnny Alberto Salazar and Melton Pineda were sentenced for defamation in 2012, so very recently. Both sentences were eventually overturned in the appeals process by the appeals court, but the chilling effect remains. In Grenada, let's see around the table, Stanley Charles and George Worm were sentenced for libel in 1999. Grenada is one of the very few countries that has repealed criminal defamation laws recently as a consequence of IPI's, well, we want to believe as a consequence of IPI campaign, but certainly after IPI started campaigning in this direction. However, a number of other seditious libel and other laws affecting journalists remain on the books. In Haiti, we talk about Guy Delva. He was sentenced to prison in 2008. And in 2011, 3 journalists were fired from Haiti State Television and charged with criminal defamation. IPI hasn't been able to find information about the outcome of that sentence, of those charges. And in Suriname, George Finlay, the publisher of the newspaper The West, was charged with criminal defamation in 2005 and again in 2007. The problem with defamation laws is that they go too far. And in doing so, they have a chilling effect. They have a chilling effect on the journalists that end up being captured in this case, and have a chilling effect on the whole journalistic community. The risk of criminal charges is too big, and while the protection of reputation is a legitimate one, and certainly states have to ensure that there are laws protecting reputation, criminal laws to protect reputation are widely considered going too far. There is a perception that civil laws protecting defamation and worded in a certain manner and so on provide a sufficient remedy for this. Therefore, in the past 2 years, IPI, in cooperation with Wesley and ACM, we have carried out an intense campaign to encourage governments throughout the Caribbean to amend their defamation laws. And many of you have seen IPI delegations coming to your countries exactly for this purpose. We have achieved some results. As I said, I mentioned Grenada. New bills are currently being tabled in Jamaica, Dominican Republic. Here in Trinidad and Tobago, there is a bill which is being considered by the government. We don't know how long that process will last. Other countries like Antigua and Barbuda or Bahamas, the government made strong commitment. Again, these processes are long and are difficult, but all these steps would not have been possible without the hard work of ACM, of Wesley Gibbons, and many of you in the room. International press freedom groups like IPI, like IFEX, are only as strong as their local partners are and their local members are. And there is absolutely nothing that IPI or even IFEX can do or can achieve at the local level without a close cooperation with a local partner which is respected at the local level and within the local journalistic community. So while I hope that IPI will continue to be able to cooperate with all of you, I also hope that you will always consider IFEX and IPI and ACM as important partners in the protection of press freedom in your regions. I mentioned criminal defamation as one of the problems IPI has identified in the region. Indeed, there are many other issues that affect press freedom here. And as I said, I'm looking forward to hearing from you more. What we have seen is, in many cases, a degree of government interference by the governments and the lack of acceptance by the governments that press freedom is a right and is a value in a democratic society. So this leads to a situation of antagonism between the government and the media, which is extremely damaging for everybody. I was talking last night about the situation in Guyana. but there are many other countries where the government used the state broadcaster to attack the opposition, and including the opposition media. And you create a mentality of either you're with us or you're against us, which is the worst you can do for journalism. Other problems we have looked at relate to media licenses, like broadcasting licenses in particular, the fact that they're not distributed in a fair manner, or they're not distributed at all in some cases. They're not given out at all. Again, we've been looking at Guyana in this case. The lack of independence of state media and the failure of moving from what is considered a state broadcaster to a public broadcaster. Yesterday, talking with some journalists here in Trinidad and Tobago, I was informed that whenever there is a change of government, all the top people within the state broadcaster change, which is terrible, and I do not need to explain which consequence this has on the news reporting. First of all, on the strategy of the public, well, I would call it on the state broadcaster in this case, which is always short-sighted, and secondly, of the fact that these persons are felt that they represent a party and not the public interest. So this is a big problem. We looked at discrimination and distribution of state advertising also as a problem and as something that leads to censorship. State advertising is in many countries around the Caribbean one of the core supports for the media industry, and if it is not distributed fairly and independently from the content of the news outlets, it generates problems in journalists' ability to disseminate news. Again, another example from TNT, that from Trinidad and Tobago. Yesterday, a journalist asked me how I considered the practice of the fact that the government here facilitates the ability of journalists to have houses, to buy houses, and the journalist was saying, it's very difficult here because houses are very expensive. We earn very little money, so we need also this support by the government, which is. So what I said is in many countries in the world this would be absolutely not acceptable. In other countries, it is acceptable that the government provide support to the entire journalistic community, but this type, because they want to support the fact that there is a multiplicity of opinion and many media outlets around, but and because they value the journalistic community, but if this is not done in a fair manner, if this support is not given to the friends as well as the enemies from a political perspective and to all the media around, we have a problem. And I'm sure that those of you who have been affected by this type of pressure will know better than me. Finally, an issue that we always hear here, but also around the world, is the issue of bias and politicization of the media. The fact that media houses tend to align themselves with political parties. From a press freedom perspective, in the end, it is your freedom to decide which opinions and which news you want to express. But the problem is one of credibility. And the problem is, again, one of how much does this affect the journalistic community at large. So if I lose my credibility and all the media around in my society lose their credibility, we will lose the support of our audiences, we will lose the support of those who are our stakeholders, and eventually this will and may as well lead to a loss of our rights. So these are all issues that you probably more in your function as journalist association want to address. Indeed, you can address these issues also from a journalistic perspective. Covering these type of concerns in the media is very important in order to raise awareness within the society. But as a journalist association, you can be, in countries where the political situation allows this, you can be the one neutral body that upholds the principles. And this is exactly what Wesley said before, is not only the role of journalists association to protect their members because they are journalists, but they protect principles, and the principles are the rights of the journalist and the right of freedom of expression. And unfortunately, there is no other institution in your country that can do this as good as Journalist Association can. And I think it's a great advantage that you have created this network together with ACM. ACM, as mentioned, he's very well respected at the international level from IPI, from IFEX, and you can have all the supports you want from these, for what we call the international community. So I very much hope to work with all of you on these issues in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.